Greetings. I'm the silent storyteller, and today I'll share with you a story born of rain, silence, and the unforgiving sea. It's the story of a fisherman, a village fading into the mist, and the fragile bond between past and present. Settle in, the waves are waiting. Chapter 1. Rain over the village. The rain had been falling for 5 days straight. Not a downpour, not a storm, just that steady, needling drizzle that soaked you through without ever raising its voice. It turned the dirt paths between the wooden shacks into sludge and made the whole village smell of fish, salt, and old rope. On the edge of the dock, Calum Reed lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake, but probably should have. 52 years old. Skin like dried kelp. Shoulders heavy from a lifetime of lifting nets and carrying grief. He squinted through the grey horizon. No boats coming in. No boats going out. Just the tide breathing in and out like an old beast. Someone coughed behind him. Calum didn't turn. He knew the sound. "Morning," said Tommy Groves, the harbour master, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of driftwood and glue. "You heading out?" Calum nodded. Tommy sucked his teeth. "Alone again?" Another nod. Tommy didn't press it. He never did. Calum was a man of few words and fewer friends. Not that he was cruel. Just closed. Like a shack with boards nailed over the windows, the village, Ness Haven, population shrinking yearly, had its own rhythm. Old men drank coffee at dawn, younger men talked about moving south, and women ran everything else. There used to be more boats. More kids. More life. Now there were just stories, most of them about things that didn't come back. Calum's boat, the Maureen, creaked at her mooring. Named after his wife. Gone 10 years now. People didn't talk about what happened. Some said it was a storm. Others whispered it wasn't. Calum never corrected them. He boarded without another word. Started the engine. It coughed once, then roared. The gulls scattered. As the boat pulled away from the dock, Tommy stood with his hands in his pockets, watching. Not worried, just watching. Like he always did. Out at sea, the world changed. No houses, no noise. Just endless grey. The kind of grey that got into your bones. Calum liked it that way. Out here, things were simple. Fish, weather, and waiting. You didn't have to talk. You didn't have to explain. You just worked. The radio crackled. He turned it off. The silence was better. He dropped the nets. Checked the lines. Let the wind push him north, toward deeper water. That night, after the last light drained from the sky, Calum sat alone on deck, eating a tin of beans with a rusted spoon. The sea whispered all around him. He looked toward the stars, none tonight, and whispered one word under his breath, Maureen. It could have been the wind that answered. Or maybe nothing did. Chapter 2. The Offer. Back in the village, the rain let up just long enough to make the streets look like they'd been oiled. Calum stepped off the Maureen with stiff legs and a sore back. He'd hauled in little more than water and disappointment. On the dock stood a tall, broad-shouldered lad in a worn green jacket, hands shoved in his pockets. Early 30s, maybe. Dark hair, damp and messy. He looked like someone trying hard not to look nervous. "Mr. Reed," the young man said. Calum didn't answer right away. He tied the boat, lit a smoke, and gave the boy a once-over. He finally said. The lad stepped forward. "Name's Fraser Calum. I heard ye might be looking for help. Thought I'd offer myself." Calum exhaled slowly. "Who told you that?" Fraser scratched the back of his neck. "Heard it at the co-op. Few folk said you've been heading out on your own since." He trailed off, suddenly unsure of the line he was crossing. Calum's stare was heavy. Since what? Fraser shifted. Since always then. They stood in silence, waves slapping gently against the hull. Somewhere, a gull cried out like it had lost something. I didn't need help, Calum muttered. Fraser nodded, but didn't step away. Still. Thought I'd ask. I know the sea. Fished with my dad since I was a lad. Till he drank himself off the bloody pier 2 winters ago. Calum flicked ash into the wind. Sorry to hear. Don't be, Fraser said. Was bound to happen. There was something in his tone. Not cold, not angry. Just plain. Honest. Calum didn't like it. Or maybe he did, but didn't want to. You know how to handle nets? He asked. Aye. And motors, GPS, even know how to cook without poisoning anybody. Calum looked back at the Maureen. She wasn't made for two, but maybe she should have been. Fraser added, I'm not looking to take over. Just get back out there. Can't sit around waiting for things to change. That part hit harder than it should have. Calum sniffed. You show up before dawn. 6 sharp. Rain or no. I'll be there. And if you're late, Calum said, stepping past him, I'll leave you behind. Fraser grinned. Fair enough, sir. Calum stopped. Turned just slightly. Don't call me sir. Fraser said. Calum then. Calum didn't correct him. He walked toward his cottage, boots thudding against the wet boards. The clouds were thick and low, and he could smell more rain coming. But for the first time in a long while, someone was willing to share the weight. He wasn't sure if that made things better. Or worse. Chapter 3. Departure Day. The morning crept in grey and quiet. No sun, just a lighter shade of cloud. Calum was already at the dock when the first gull screamed overhead. He stood by the Maureen, sleeves rolled, mug of instant coffee cooling in his hand. Fraser showed up 5 minutes early. No words. Just a nod and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He wore the same jacket as the day before, zipped halfway, sea-stained and practical. Calum liked that. No fuss. They untied the boat and pushed off without ceremony. Engines grumbled low as they drifted from the harbour mouth. The village behind them shrank into fog and drizzle, houses blurred like smudged pencil marks on a page. Calum didn't speak. He didn't have to. Fraser moved with enough familiarity to show he wasn't bluffing. He checked the fuel, tested the radio, then leaned against the side rail, quiet but present. The sea rolled under them, not violent, just heavy. Like it had something to say but wasn't ready to speak yet. Out past the last buoy, Calum cut the engine and let the boat sway. The waves slapped against the hull in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He liked that sound. Always had. Even when it hurt, he opened the hatch and started setting up the nets. Fraser joined in without instruction. They worked in sync. Not perfect, not polished, but steady. The kind of teamwork built not on words, but on repetition and shared silence. A couple of hours passed before either said anything. Looks deeper than I remember, Fraser muttered, half to himself. Calum replied, adjusting a line. Sea always feels deeper when you've not been out in a while. Fraser didn't answer, but Calum caught the way he looked out across the water. Not fear, something closer to longing. Or maybe memory. It was hard to tell the difference sometimes. They dropped the nets, marked the spot, and drifted south with the current. Lunch was bread, cheese, and boiled eggs. Nothing warm. Calum didn't believe in wasting fuel for comfort. Midday turned to afternoon, and the clouds sank lower. A mist rolled in from the east, curling like smoke around the deck. Visibility shrank, but Calum kept the course by instinct. Fraser broke the silence again. Used to fish with my dad out here. Before things went bad. He always said the sea gives just enough to keep YA coming back. Calum nodded slowly. Aye, then takes a bit more each time. Fraser looked at him. No comment. Just a glance. Then he went back to coiling rope. The rest of the day passed without incident. No big catch. No drama. Just work. The kind that stiffens the back and quiets the mind. When the sun began to dip behind the fog, Calum muttered, "Reel it in. We'll anchor for the night." Fraser obeyed, wordless. The two men moved like shadows on a worn boat, rocking gently in a grey nowhere. Tomorrow might bring wind. Might bring fish. Or worse, but for now, there was only sea, silence, and the low hum of engines cooling in the mist. Chapter 4. Fault Lines. Night came slow, like it didn't want to be there. The mist thickened until even the stars gave up trying. The boat rocked gently on anchor, creaking like old bones. Calum sat at the small galley table below deck, peeling a potato with a pocket knife. One eye on the blade. One ear on the silence. Fraser sat opposite him, hunched, damp sleeves pushed up. He was fiddling with the knot on his bootlace like it owed him money. They hadn't said much since sunset. Above, the wind shifted, just enough to rattle something loose in the rigging. Calum didn't move. He knew every sound this boat made. That one was harmless. Fraser finally spoke. "You ever think about leaving the village?" Calum snorted. "And go where?" "City's no place for folk like me." Fraser nodded, like he expected that. "Still, it's dying out there. Streets feel smaller every year." Calum looked up from the potato. "Village isn't dying. Just shedding. Folk who don't want the hard work leave. What's left is what matters." Fraser gave a faint smile. "You sound like my dad." Calum raised an eyebrow. He used to say the same thing. That change was weakness. Said if I ever stopped fishing, I'd be just another mouth breath in city air. "You stopped?" Calum asked. "For a while," Fraser admitted. "Moved south. Tried mechanics. Worked in a garage. Good money. Bad sleep. Couldn't stand the stillness of land." Calum grunted. "Stillness is earned. Not given." Fraser nodded slowly, then shifted in his seat. He wasn't a bad man. Just angry all the time. Thought the world owed him something. Calum didn't answer. He dropped the peeled potato into the pot with a splash. "Yours?" Fraser asked. "Your wife, I mean." Calum's knife paused midair. For a second, everything held its breath, even the sea outside. "Maureen," he said, voice low. 10 years gone. Storm took her. "I'm sorry," Fraser said, genuinely. No edge, no push. Just quiet respect. Calum resumed peeling, slower now. She wasn't meant to be out there. Was helping her brother run cargo. Quick run, they said. Weather turned. Boat flipped. Found him 3 days later. Her, never. He didn't look up. Didn't need to. The room had changed temperature. Fraser let the silence breathe. Then, carefully, that YYA fish alone. Calum set down the blade. His hands were still. "No," he said. "I fish alone because people make mistakes. Boats don't." The two men sat there, the pot steaming between them. Later that night, Fraser climbed topside for a smoke. The mist had lifted just enough to show a single star. It blinked behind a slow-moving cloud. Below deck, Calum lay in his bunk, eyes open. Listening. Not to the sea, he knew its tune by heart. He listened to the breathing above. A rhythm not his own. Not threatening. Not welcome, either. Just different. Fault lines were forming. Small cracks, invisible to the eye, but the pressure was building. Tomorrow, the nets would come up. And with them, something else. Chapter 5. The storm. The wind shifted sometime before dawn. Calum woke with a knot in his gut, the kind that had kept him alive longer than most. The sea had gone quiet, but not in a good way. It was that tense silence, like something waiting to hit. He climbed topside. Fraser was already up, hood pulled tight, staring out into the dark water. Winds coming around hard from the east, Calum said. "Aye," Fraser replied. Barometers dropped. Fast. They didn't say much after that. Didn't need to. They knew what it meant. By midday, the sky had darkened into something mean. Swells started to build, slow and lazy at first, then suddenly sharp, stacking on themselves like bad decisions. The radio spat static. The GPS blinked red and died. Calum cursed under his breath. Cheap bloody thing. Fraser held the wheel as the moorine pitched over a wave. "We should head back," he shouted over the wind. "No," Calum snapped. "We ride it out. We've done worse." Fraser glanced at him, eyes narrowed. But I don't see Maureen here, do I?" The words landed like a slap. For a heartbeat, Calum said nothing. Then he turned, jaw tight. "You don't know a damn thing about her. Or me. I know you'd rather sink than let anyone take the wheel," Fraser shouted. Another wave cracked across the bow, soaking them both. The wind screamed like it had a grudge. Fraser fought to keep the boat straight. Calum yanked at the lines, trying to secure the loose gear sliding across the deck. His fingers were numb, knees buckling with every tilt of the sea. Then it happened. The net winch jerked violently, cable snapping free. A hook flew out like a bullet. Fraser ducked just in time, lost his footing, and went over the rail. A splash. Gone. Calum's heart stopped. He scrambled across the slick deck, dropping to his knees, peering into the boiling dark. Fraser. Nothing. Just the storm, laughing. Then the hand. Clinging to the starboard ladder. Calum moved fast. Grabbed the wrist. Pulled with everything he had left. Fraser came up coughing seawater, gasping, eyes wide with shock and rage. "You're mad," he spat. "You would have let me drown." Calum didn't answer. He just sat back, soaked and shaking, chest heaving with something that wasn't just exhaustion. Below deck, later, Fraser stripped off his soaked jacket, breathing hard. "You know what this is, Calum," he said. "You're not punishing the sea. You're punishing yourself. And you're dragging the rest of us with you." Calum didn't respond. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the wall. Not angry. Not blank. Just hollowed out. Outside, the wind howled past them, dragging its claws over the deck. Inside, the real storm had already hit. Chapter 6. Stillness on the waves. The storm broke sometime before dawn. It didn't end, it just left. Like something that had gotten what it came for. When Calum climbed to the deck, the sea was flat as glass. No wind. No gulls. Just a low mist clinging to the water like regret. The moorine floated in silence, everything soaked and still. Fraser was already topside, leaning on the rail, wrapped in a blanket he'd pulled from below. His knuckles were white around a tin mug of black coffee. He didn't look at Calum when he spoke. "Thought I was dead last night." Calum said nothing. He lit a cigarette, the flame trembling slightly in his hand. His knee still ached from pulling Fraser up. His shoulder burned from where the winch cable had grazed him. Fraser sipped. "You didn't jump in." "No," Calum said. "I pulled you out." "Aye. That was it." They spent the day in near silence, drifting. The motor was working again, barely, but there was no rush. No destination, Just the sea, flat and heavy, holding them like a secret. The nets were gone, lost in the chaos. So was the catch. All that remained was fuel, time, and the space between two men who had seen too much of each other. At midday, Fraser cooked something, canned stew heated over the tiny burner. He set a bowl in front of Calum and sat opposite him without a word. The food was hot. That was enough. After a while, Calum spoke. "You were right. About Maureen." Fraser looked up. "I did push her," Calum continued. "Told her it'd be fine. That we'd had worse weather. She wanted to wait, but I didn't. Thought the sea owed me one good day." Fraser didn't interrupt. He didn't nod either. Just listened. Calum took another bite before speaking again. "I waited 3 days. Hauled her brother in with my own hands. He'd gone stiff. His eyes were open. I kept thinking she'd float up next. Like the sea'd give her back if I just stayed long enough." Fraser set down his spoon. "You can't stay out here forever, Calum." Calum met his eyes. For once, he didn't look away. "Maybe not. But it's quieter than home." That hung between them. Honest, sharp, true. Later, as the sun broke faintly through the mist, not warm, just visible, Fraser stood near the bow, watching the horizon. "You ever wonder what you're waiting for?" he asked. Calum took a long drag on his cigarette. "No. I know exactly what I'm waiting for." Fraser turned to him. "And if it never comes?" Calum exhaled. "Then I stay." For the rest of the evening, neither of them spoke again. The sea didn't move. The sky didn't change. Time stretched thin across the still water. But something, small, unseen, had shifted. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It just was. Chapter 7. Return to shore. The coastline came into view in the late afternoon. Nesshaven sat hunched beneath the grey sky, unchanged, unimpressed. Smoke curled from a few chimneys. A dog barked once, far off. The rest was still. Calum stood at the helm, one hand resting on the wheel, the other around a chipped mug of tea gone cold. Fraser sat on a crate nearby, silent, chewing on a mint he'd found in his pack. The kind his mother used to carry, strong and sharp, clearing the nose. Neither of them had said much since the sea flattened out. As they pulled into the harbour, the wooden planks of the dock creaked like old bones greeting familiar pain. A few villagers glanced up from their routines, but no one waved. It wasn't that kind of place. Tommy Groves was waiting at the edge of the pier, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. "Figured you would either show up today," he said, "or not at all." Calum tied off the boat, then stepped onto the dock with a grunt. "Bit of weather," he said simply. Fraser followed behind, bag over his shoulder. His face was drawn, but steady. There was something new in his walk, less aimless. Still tired, but anchored. Tommy nodded toward the boat. "Didn't bring back much, I take it." Calum shrugged. "Brought back enough." Tommy gave Fraser a sideways glance. "He do all right." "Aye," Calum replied. "Better than I deserve." Fraser raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The compliment hung in the air like steam from the sea. As they walked back through the village, the roads were just as muddy as they'd left them. A woman scrubbed fish guts from a crate outside her door. A boy threw stones into puddles. It could have been any day. Every day. They reached a fork near the old chapel. Fraser slowed. "Well," he said, "suppose I'll be heading up to the hills. My uncle's got a shed I can crash in for now." Calum nodded. "Suppose you will." Neither made a move to shake hands. That wasn't how it worked here. Fraser took a few steps, then turned back. "I'll be around. If you ever need a hand again." Calum looked at him for a long moment. "You still got that knife?" Fraser blinked. "What?" Calum pulled something from his coat pocket, a small, worn-handled folding knife, the kind passed from father to son, not bought in a shop. He held it out. Fraser hesitated, then took it. "Was this yours?" "My dad's," Calum said. Didn't get much right. But he knew a good blade when he saw one. Fraser folded the knife shut and tucked it into his pocket without a word. Then he turned and walked up the muddy path, shoulders straight, wind at his back. Calum stood there a while, listening to the quiet. The village was still dying. The sea still took more than it gave. But maybe, just maybe, something had been returned this time. Chapter 8. The Final Haul. A week passed. Maybe two. The days blurred together in fog and drizzle, the way they always did in Ness Haven. Calum hadn't spoken to Fraser since they'd returned. He hadn't needed to. Some things didn't need repeating. One morning, without much thought, Calum loaded the Maureen again. Alone. The same way he had for years. Nets, fuel, tin of beans, flask of tea. Muscle memory handled the rest. The dock was empty, except for a tabby cat curled under a lobster crate. It blinked at him and went back to sleep. He untied the rope. Pushed off. The sea greeted him the way it always did, cold, honest, and without pity. It was a calm day. Barely a ripple. The kind of day that made you think maybe things weren't so bad. Calum didn't trust it, but he accepted it. Out past the headland, he dropped the nets. Not for the fish. For the ritual. For the rhythm. It was never really about the catch anymore. Hadn't been for years. He made tea on the burner. Watched steam curl upward like a ghost with no place to go. A seal bobbed in the distance. Just its head, glassy eyes watching. Calum raised a hand in quiet greeting. The seal blinked, then disappeared. Later, as he hauled in the nets, something tugged, heavy but steady. He braced himself, leaned back, worked the winch. It wasn't a big haul. A few cod. 1 or 2 crabs tangled in the mesh. Nothing worth bragging about. But it was clean. Uncomplicated. He stared at the fish flopping in the crate, silver sides flashing in the light. He could almost hear Fraser's voice, half amused. "You call that a haul?" Calum smiled. Just barely. He cleaned the deck. Packed the gear. Lit a cigarette and leaned on the railing as the Maureen drifted. The wind tugged gently at the corners of his coat. For once, it didn't feel like it was trying to pull him under. As the coastline came into view again, that same huddle of grey roofs and rusted antennas, Calum felt something he couldn't quite name. He wasn't healed. Wasn't saved. But something had shifted. A weight loosened. A breath let out. He docked the boat, stepped off, and tied the line without thinking. On the pier, Fraser stood waiting, hands in his coat pockets, same battered jacket, eyes squinting into the morning light. "Thought you might have drifted off for good," he said. Calum looked at him. Thought about it. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Fraser nodded toward the boat. "Need help unloading?" Calum didn't answer right away. Then, "I could do." Fraser stepped forward. Together, they lifted the crates. The end. That was the final haul, a quiet journey through loss, memory, and the resilience of those who live by the sea. If you'd like to hear more stories told in silence, follow me, and I'll take you to the next one. For now, thank you for listening, until we meet again.